Virtual assistant falls for wealthy client, their first meeting changes everything. Chapter 1. Kitty Carpenter stood frozen beside the welcome table, champagne flute trembling in her grip, staring at the man across the mountain resort's elegant reception room. 18 months of professional emails, late-night strategy sessions, and carefully crafted responses had not prepared her for this moment. The Henry Robbins approaching her bore no resemblance to the polished executive she'd imagined. Where she'd pictured someone cold and corporate, this man moved with quiet confidence, silver threading his dark hair in ways that spoke of wisdom rather than age. His blue eyes, scanning the crowd with practiced assessment, suddenly locked onto hers. The champagne glass nearly slipped from her fingers as recognition dawned across his features: surprise, confusion, and something else entirely. "Ms. Carpenter?" His voice carried the same measured tone from their phone calls, but hearing it directed at her face-to-face sent unexpected warmth down her spine. "I have to admit, you're not quite what I expected." Kitty forced a smile, the one she'd practiced for situations exactly like this. "Mr. Robbins." "I could say the same." But her voice caught slightly, betraying her composure. His handshake lingered a heartbeat longer than necessary, his palm warm against hers in a way that made her acutely aware of every nerve ending. "You know," Henry said, his eyes never leaving her face, "your email suggested someone much more severe." "Severe?" Kitty laughed, a genuine sound that surprised them both. In all their correspondence, all their late-night problem-solving sessions, he'd never heard her actual laugh. It was richer than he'd imagined, warmer. "I suppose 18 months of correspondence doesn't reveal everything about a person. But that was the problem, wasn't it?" Their emails had revealed far more than either had intended. Late Thursday nights when Henry would send strategy questions that turned into philosophical discussions. Early morning responses where Kitty's insights went beyond mere assistant duties, showing a mind that grasped complex business dynamics better than executives with decades of experience. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced Brian, the retreat coordinator, his voice cutting through their suspended moment. "Welcome to Summit Ridge Resort. This weekend will challenge everything you think you know about communication, strategy, and connection." How prophetic those words would prove to be. As Henry guided Kitty toward their assigned table, his hand briefly touching her lower back in a gesture both protective and proprietary, she caught sight of Diana Langford watching them with sharp interest. Diana represented everything Kitty had learned to navigate. Old money, inherited connections, the assumption that intelligence correlated with pedigree. "I've been looking forward to meeting Henry's mysterious virtual assistant," Diana said. 18 months is quite a long working relationship for someone we've never seen." "Kitty has been invaluable to my practice," Henry replied, his voice carrying an edge Kitty had never heard before. "Protective. Her strategic insights have saved my clients millions." But Diana had already turned away, dismissing Kitty as surely as if she'd waved her hand. This was familiar territory, being acknowledged for her usefulness while remaining fundamentally invisible as a person. Henry's jaw tightened. "Ignore her. Diana thinks the world operates the same way it did 30 years ago." "It's fine," Kitty murmured, though it wasn't. She'd built her entire career learning to be indispensable while remaining unnoticed. Somehow, seeing Henry witness this dynamic made it sting differently. Their first official retreat activity paired them for a trust exercise. Of course, it did. Brian seemed to take particular pleasure in these arrangements, as if he sensed the undercurrents nobody else could identify. "Close your eyes," Henry instructed, his voice softer now, meant only for her. "I'm going to guide you through the obstacle course." Kitty hesitated. Trusting someone else with her physical safety felt more intimate than any email they'd exchanged. But she closed her eyes, and Henry's hand found hers, steady, sure, calloused in unexpected places that spoke of work beyond boardroom handshakes. 3 steps forward, he said, his breath warm near her ear. "There's a branch to your left, I've got you." She'd spent 2 years managing his calendar, anticipating his needs, solving problems he didn't know he had. But this, his voice guiding her through darkness, his presence solid beside her, this was different. This was Henry Robbins, the man, not Henry Robbins the client. When she opened her eyes, they stood inches apart, his hands still steadying her shoulders. For a moment, neither moved. The corporate retreat, the other participants, the boundaries they'd maintained, all of it faded. "Well done, you two," Brian called out, breaking their trance. Natural partnership there. If only he knew how natural it had become, Kitty thought. How Henry's emails arrived precisely when she needed intellectual stimulation. How her responses seemed to unlock something in him that clients and colleagues never accessed. How they'd built something neither wanted to name. That evening, as the retreat settled into its rhythm of forced socialization and networking, Kitty found herself on the resort's terrace, needing air that didn't smell of expensive cologne and corporate ambition. She'd changed from her chosen corporate attire into jeans and a soft sweater, clothes that felt more like herself than the armor she wore for business events. Escaping too? Henry's voice came from behind her, and she turned to find him approaching with 2 cups of coffee. Gone was his suit jacket, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that suggested he did more than push papers around. "The networking gets overwhelming," she admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Everyone is trying to figure out who's important enough to talk to. And where do you fit in that hierarchy?" Kitty studied his face in the terrace lighting. This was dangerous territory, the kind of honesty their emails had danced around but never directly addressed. "I think we both know the answer to that." "Do we?" Henry moved closer, leaning against the terrace railing beside her. "Because the Kitty Carpenter I've worked with for months isn't someone who fits neatly into anyone's hierarchy. She's someone who sees solutions where others see problems. Someone who makes me think differently about everything." The words hung between them, heavier than mere professional appreciation. They were venturing into territory neither had mapped in their careful correspondence. "Your emails," Kitty said, "they're different than this. Than you, here." "Different how?" "More honest, maybe. Like you're not performing for anyone." Henry was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the mountain landscape. "Those late-night emails, sometimes I'd sit in my office after everyone left and type responses I'd never send during business hours. Thoughts that weren't suitable for professional correspondence." Kitty's pulse quickened. "What kind of thoughts?" But before Henry could answer, laughter from inside the resort broke their moment. Other retreat participants were moving toward the terrace, and their private space was about to become public again. "We should get back," Henry said reluctantly. "Should we?" He looked at her then, as if seeing someone entirely different from the professional colleague he'd imagined. "Kitty, what are we doing here?" It was the question neither had dared ask in their months of emails and correspondence. Standing on that terrace, mountain air cool against their skin, the question felt both terrifying and inevitable. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our Dear Love Diaries family. Your special place in this community of heartfelt stories is waiting for you. These passionate journeys of souls connecting against all odds have brought together thousands of beautiful hearts just like yours. Make sure you hit the bell too, so you'll know immediately when a new story unfolds in our diary of love. But the answer would have to wait. Diana Langford appeared in the terrace doorway, her voice cutting through their suspended moment with surgical precision. "Henry, darling, there you are. I've been telling the Morrison account about your brilliant virtual assistant. They're quite impressed that you've managed such a unique working arrangement." The emphasis on unique carried implications Kitty understood perfectly. She was an oddity, a curiosity, someone to be discussed rather than engaged with directly. Henry's expression hardened, but Kitty was already stepping back, rebuilding the walls that had protected her for years. "I should check my messages. Early morning client calls." She escaped before either could respond, but not before catching the frustration in Henry's eyes or the satisfaction in Diana's smile. This was why she'd learned to remain invisible. This was why 18 months of emails felt safer than 18 minutes of face-to-face reality. But as she walked back toward the resort lobby, she could hear Henry's voice behind her, tight with controlled anger. "Diana, I need to be very clear about something." Kitty didn't stay to hear the rest. She'd learned long ago that battles fought on her behalf usually created more problems than they solved. Better to retreat, regroup, and remember why professional boundaries existed in the first place. Back in her room, she stared at her laptop screen, cursor blinking in an empty email draft. For months, she'd known exactly what to say to Henry Robbins. Tonight, for the first time, she had no words at all. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister Kayla: "How's the fancy retreat? Meet any interesting people?" Kitty typed and deleted several responses before settling on, "It's complicated." More complicated than she'd ever imagined when she'd accepted this weekend's invitation. More complicated than working relationships were supposed to become. But as she lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the mountain wind against her window, she couldn't stop replaying the warmth of Henry's hand steadying her through the trust exercise, or the way his voice had softened when they were finally alone. Tomorrow would bring more retreat activities and more forced proximity. But tonight, she allowed herself to wonder what Henry had been about to say before Diana interrupted them on the terrace. What thoughts had he typed in late-night emails but never sent? And why did the possibility of finding out feel both thrilling and terrifying? Outside her window, Summit Ridge Resort settled into mountain quiet, but Kitty's mind was anything but peaceful. Their months of careful, measured communication had just collided with undeniable chemistry, and she had no roadmap for what came next. The only certainty was that nothing would ever be the same between them again. Chapter 2. The next morning brought team challenges that seemed designed by someone with a cruel sense of humor. Brian had paired Kitty and Henry for every activity, from problem-solving scenarios to strategic planning exercises. Each task required them to work in closer proximity than their 18 months of emails had ever demanded. "Your turn to be blindfolded," Kitty said during the communication exercise, trying to keep her tone light and balanced. But when Henry closed his eyes and placed his trust entirely in her guidance, something shifted in her chest. "Forward 2 steps, she instructed, her hand hovering near his elbow without quite touching. "There's a table edge coming up on your right." Henry moved with confidence, following her directions without hesitation. It struck her how completely he trusted her judgment, more than most people trusted her with anything beyond scheduling appointments. "Left turn now. 3 more steps and you'll reach the target." When he completed the course flawlessly and opened his eyes, his smile was different from his corporate expression. Genuine. "You have excellent spatial awareness. You have excellent listening skills." They stood there for a moment, the simple exercise feeling more intimate than it should have. Other retreat participants moved around them, but neither seemed inclined to step away first. "Impressive teamwork," Diana observed, appearing beside them with her usual timing. "Though I suppose months of remote work create certain efficiencies." There was something in her tone that made Kitty stiffen. Diana's compliments always carried undertones, implications that made Kitty feel like she was being studied under glass. "Kitty has exceptional strategic instincts," Henry said firmly. "Her insights have transformed how I approach client problems." "How lovely that you found such a dedicated assistant." The word assistant hung in the air like a label neither Henry nor Kitty had chosen but both were expected to accept. It reduced everything they'd built together to a simple employer-employee dynamic, erasing the intellectual partnership that had developed through months of collaboration. Henry's expression darkened, but Kitty was already moving toward the next activity station. She'd learned not to correct people's assumptions about her role. Corrections usually made things worse. But Henry wasn't finished. "Diana, Kitty isn't just an assistant. She's a strategic consultant whose recommendations have saved my clients over $2 million in the past year alone. Diana raised an eyebrow. $2 million? That's quite impressive for someone without formal business credentials. The comment landed exactly as intended. Kitty felt her cheeks warm, not from embarrassment but from frustration. This was why she preferred email communication. Words on a screen couldn't convey condescension or judgment. They couldn't make her feel small. Credentials don't create insight, Henry replied, his voice carrying an edge Kitty had never heard in their phone calls. Intelligence does. And Kitty has more business intelligence than most MBA graduates I've worked with. Of course she does, darling. I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. But Diana's smile suggested she'd meant exactly that. She drifted away toward another group, leaving Henry and Kitty in awkward silence. You didn't need to defend me, Kitty said quietly. Yes, I did. It just creates more attention. More questions about our working relationship. Henry studied her face. Is that what you're worried about? Questions? Kitty glanced around at the other retreat participants, executives, consultants, business owners who moved through these environments with inherited confidence. I know how this looks. How I look here. How do you look? Like someone who doesn't belong. Henry was quiet for a moment. You belong anywhere your mind can contribute value. And your mind. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Your mind has contributed more value to my work than anyone else I've collaborated with. The admission hung between them, more personal than their work relationship typically allowed. Kitty felt something dangerous blooming in her chest, hope, maybe, or recognition that someone finally saw her capabilities. Next challenge, everyone, Brian called out, breaking their moment. Partnership trust falls. One person falls backwards, the other catches them. Of course. Because the universe apparently had a sense of humor about timing. Henry positioned himself behind Kitty for the first attempt. I've got you, he said, his voice low near her ear. Just lean back. Kitty had spent years learning to catch herself when she fell, financially, mentally, emotionally. Letting someone else be responsible for her safety felt almost impossibly vulnerable. But she closed her eyes and let herself fall backwards, trusting Henry's strength to keep her safe. His arms caught her securely, pulling her back against his chest for a moment longer than the exercise required. She could feel his heartbeat against her back, steady and strong, and suddenly the corporate retreat felt far away. Your turn, she said when they switched positions, trying to ignore how her pulse had quickened. Henry fell backwards without hesitation, with absolute trust in his movement. Catching him required all her strength, her arms wrapping around his chest to steady them both. For a heartbeat, they remained connected, her arms around him, his body warm against hers, neither quite ready to step away. Well done, you two, Brian observed with interest. Natural trust there. If only Brian knew how unnatural trust felt for both of them. Henry had spent years surrounded by people who valued his reputation more than his person. Kitty had learned early that depending on others usually led to disappointment. Yet here they were, catching each other without question. The day continued with more exercises designed to break down interpersonal barriers. By evening, Kitty felt emotionally wrung out from hours of forced proximity and Diana's pointed observations. She needed space to process everything happening between her and Henry. After dinner, she escaped to the resort's garden area, finding a quiet bench surrounded by mountain laurel and early spring flowers. The evening air carried the scent of pine and possibility, and for the first time all day, she could breathe properly. She'd been there maybe 10 minutes when footsteps approached on the gravel path. She knew without looking that it was Henry, something about his pace, measured but purposeful. Mind if I join you? He asked. The networking reception was getting intense. Kitty gestured to the empty space beside her. Escape from corporate socializing? Something like that. Henry sat down, leaving space between them. I wanted to apologize for earlier. With Diana. I may have made things more complicated for you. You don't need to apologize for recognizing my work. But it puts you in an awkward position, doesn't it? When I push back against how people categorize you. Kitty considered this. Most people who worked with her simply accepted others' assumptions about her role. Henry was the first to actively challenge those assumptions in public. It's complicated, she admitted. I appreciate the recognition, but it draws attention you'd rather avoid. Exactly. Henry was quiet for a moment, studying the garden landscape in the fading light. Can I ask you something? And you can tell me it's none of my business. Go ahead. Why virtual assistants? With your strategic mind, you could be running companies instead of supporting them. The question touched something raw in Kitty's chest. My mother got sick 4 years ago. Cancer. The medical bills were. She paused, organizing her thoughts. I was working in corporate strategy then, climbing the ladder, doing all the things you're supposed to do. But when Mom needed constant care and the bills started piling up, I needed work that paid immediately and offered flexibility. So you started over. I started surviving. Kitty's voice was steady, matter-of-fact. Virtual assistants paid better than I expected, and I could work around hospital schedules and treatment appointments. By the time Mom recovered, I'd built a client base and discovered I actually enjoyed the variety. But you missed the strategy work. I never stopped doing strategy work. I just do it from behind the scenes now, invisible to everyone except me. Their eyes met in the gathering dusk, and Kitty felt her composed exterior crumble. Except you, she confirmed softly. Henry leaned forward slightly. Those late-night emails we exchange, the ones where we solve problems that aren't officially part of your job description, those are my favorite part of the work week. Mine too, Kitty admitted, the words barely above a whisper. Sometimes I actually welcome complex client issues, because it means more back and forth with you. Is that wrong of me? Kitty's pulse quickened. They were venturing into dangerous territory now, acknowledging that their working relationship had developed layers neither had officially recognized. Probably not. Good. Because I was starting to worry I was the only one who felt like our correspondence had become something more than business communication. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Around them, the mountain evening settled into deeper shadows, creating intimacy where none should exist between consultant and virtual assistant. Henry, Kitty said carefully, what are we talking about here? Honestly? I'm not sure. He turned toward her on the bench, his knee almost touching hers. But I know that meeting you in person has made me realize something was missing from our work relationship. What was missing? The ability to see your reactions when you're thinking through problems. The way your eyes light up when you identify a solution. The way you laugh when something genuinely amuses you instead of when politeness requires it. Kitty felt heat rise in her cheeks. You've been watching me that closely? Apparently, I have. Henry's voice carried surprise, as if he were discovering this about himself. And I can't decide if that's appropriate or completely inappropriate for our working relationship. Probably completely inappropriate, Kitty said, but she was smiling as she said it. Probably. Henry smiled back. But I can't seem to care about appropriateness right now. They sat in silence for a moment, both aware they were standing at some kind of crossroads. The work relationship that had sustained them for months was shifting into something neither had planned. Your phone is buzzing, Henry observed. Kitty glanced at her phone screen. Gary Ramsey. I should probably. The friend from Atlanta? She nodded, surprised Henry remembered details about her personal life from casual email mentions. He's been calling more frequently lately. Is he more than a friend? The question was direct, personal, and completely outside their official boundaries. But sitting in the garden with evening shadows deepening around them, those boundaries felt increasingly artificial. "He'd like to be," Kitty answered honestly. Henry's expression shifted, something tightening around his eyes. "And you?" "I'm not sure what I want anymore." The words carried more meaning than either expected. They weren't just talking about Gary Ramsay now. They were talking about choices, possibilities, and the risk of wanting something that might not be wise. Share with us in the comments, have you ever had to choose between what felt safe and what felt right? We'd love to hear about your experiences with taking emotional risks. Henry's phone buzzed, breaking their suspended moment. He glanced at the screen and his expression darkened. Barbara Vale. "I should take this." The ex-business partner? Former partner, current complication. Henry stood, reluctant to break their connection. "This conversation isn't finished, Kitty. Isn't it? We have 2 more days of retreat activities, then we go back to our regular working relationship. Do we?" The question hung in the mountain air between them. Henry answered his phone and walked toward the resort, leaving Kitty alone with racing thoughts and the scent of night-blooming flowers. She called Gary back, needing the familiar comfort of his voice after the emotional upheaval of the evening. "Hey, beautiful," Gary's warm baritone came through clearly. "How's the corporate retreat? Meeting any interesting people?" "It's been educational." "That doesn't sound very enthusiastic. I thought you were looking forward to finally meeting your mystery client in person." Kitty watched Henry through the resort windows, his conversation with Barbara apparently intense. "He's not quite what I expected." "Good different or bad different?" "Complicated different." Gary was quiet for a moment. "Kitty, you know I care about you. And I know you well enough to recognize when something's shifted in your voice." "Nothing's shifted. Everything's shifted. I can hear it. Should I be concerned about this mystery client?" Kitty closed her eyes, leaning back against the garden bench. Gary knew her well, too well to be fooled by simple words. "I don't know," she admitted. "Be careful, sweetheart. Corporate types like that live in different worlds from people like us. Don't get caught up in something that can't lead anywhere real." "I know what I'm doing, Gary." "Do you?" "Because you sound like someone who's falling for her boss, and that rarely ends well for the person with less power in the relationship." The words stung because they carried truth she didn't want to acknowledge. Henry lived in a world of inherited connections and assumed authority. She was the virtual assistant he'd never planned to meet in person. Gary was right to be concerned about the power dynamics. "I should go," she said. "Early morning tomorrow." "Kitty, wait. I've been thinking about coming to visit you next weekend. Maybe it's time we had a serious conversation about where we're heading." Another choice point. Another decision about safety versus possibility. "Let me get through this retreat first, okay?" "Of course. I love you, you know that, right?" "I know." But as Kitty hung up and walked back toward the resort, she realized Gary's familiar declaration of love felt different now. Comfortable but not electric. Safe but not transformative. Nothing like the way her pulse had quickened during her garden conversation with Henry. She found Henry in the lobby, his phone call apparently finished but his expression still troubled. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Barbara's flying in tomorrow. Apparently there's a client crisis that requires immediate attention. Will you need to leave the retreat early?" "That's what she expects." Henry looked at Kitty directly. "But I'm not sure I want to anymore." The admission carried weight they both understood. Henry was choosing to stay for reasons that had nothing to do with retreat programming and everything to do with the woman standing in front of him. "Henry, if you need to handle business." "What I need," Henry interrupted, "is to finish our conversation from the garden." Kitty felt her breath catch. "When?" Tomorrow evening. After Barbara leaves and the group activities wind down. Will you meet me? It was a question that carried implications far beyond a simple meeting. They both knew that finishing their conversation would mean acknowledging what was developing between them, even if they couldn't name it yet. Where? Kitty asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The terrace where we had coffee last night. 8 o'clock. Okay. Henry smiled then, not his professional expression but something warm and anticipatory that made Kitty's stomach flutter with nervous excitement. As they walked toward the elevators, neither speaking but both acutely aware of the other's presence, Kitty realized everything had changed in the space of 2 days. Her walls were crumbling. Her clear understanding of their working relationship had become something far more complex and dangerous. Tomorrow would bring Barbara Vale and whatever complications she represented. It would bring more retreat activities designed to push participants out of their comfort zones. And it would bring that 8 o'clock meeting on the terrace, where she and Henry would finally acknowledge what had been building between them through months of emails and 2 days of undeniable chemistry. Standing outside her hotel room door, key card in hand, Kitty realized she was terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. For 18 months, she'd been the invisible virtual assistant who solved problems from behind the scenes. Tomorrow night, she would have to decide whether she was brave enough to step into visibility and risk everything she'd built with Henry for the possibility of something real. The mountain wind rustled through the resort's windows as she finally entered her room, but Kitty's mind was far from peaceful. Tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. Chapter 3. Barbara Vale arrived at Summit Ridge Resort like a storm system, all sharp angles and expensive perfume. Kitty watched from the lobby as Henry greeted his former business partner, their interaction formal but tense. Even from across the room, Barbara's disapproval was unmistakable as her eyes swept the resort's casual mountain elegance. "So this is where you've been hiding," Barbara said, her voice carrying clearly across the lobby. "Emergency board meeting tomorrow morning, Henry. The Morrison account is threatening to walk unless we can present a unified strategy by Monday. I explained the situation when you called. The retreat ends Sunday evening." "The retreat?" Barbara's laugh was sharp. "Henry, this is a $200 million account. Surely team-building exercises can wait." Kitty pretended to study her phone, but she could feel the weight of Barbara's assessment when the woman's gaze landed on her. Even without introductions, Barbara had clearly identified exactly who Kitty was and why Henry might be reluctant to leave early. "Is that her?" Barbara's voice dropped but not enough to avoid Kitty's hearing. "The virtual assistant you've become so invested in?" Henry's response was too quiet to catch, but his body language suggested controlled irritation. Whatever he said made Barbara's expression sharpen with interest rather than concern. "How fascinating," Barbara murmured. The morning's retreat activities took on a surreal quality with Barbara watching from the sidelines like an anthropologist studying unusual behavior. She positioned herself where she could observe every interaction between Henry and Kitty, taking notes on her phone with the focus of someone gathering intelligence. "Your business partner seems very attentive," Kitty observed during a break between exercises. "Barbara has strong opinions about appropriate professional relationships," Henry said. "And what's her opinion about ours?" Henry's expression darkened. "That I'm making an expensive mistake." The word stung more than Kitty expected. She'd known their developing connection carried professional risks, but having it quantified in financial terms made her feel like a liability to be calculated and minimized. "Maybe she's right," Kitty said quietly. "She's not. Henry, be realistic. I'm a virtual assistant from Atlanta. You're a third-generation consultant with clients worth hundreds of millions. What exactly do you think happens here?" "I think," Henry said, his voice intense, "that the woman I've spent almost over a year and a half learning to trust and respect deserves better than being reduced to her job title." Before Kitty could respond, Diana Langford approached with her usual impeccable timing and a folder in her hands. "Kitty, darling, I'm so glad I caught you. I have a proposal that might interest you. Diana's smile was bright and calculated. My firm is expanding our client support division. We're looking for someone with proven strategic capabilities to head the new department. Kitty accepted the folder with confusion. I'm not looking for a new position. Aren't you? A department head role with full strategic authority, competitive salary, benefits package, and the kind of professional recognition your talents deserve. Diana's emphasis on recognition was deliberate, pointed. It would be a shame to limit yourself to support roles when you clearly have leadership potential. That's generous of you, Henry interjected, his tone dry, but Kitty already has strategic responsibilities in her current position. Of course she does, darling. But there's a difference between behind-the-scenes consultation and actual authority, isn't there? The comment landed exactly as Diana intended. Kitty felt the weight of the time spent crafting perfect emails that carried Henry's name instead of her own, solving problems that built his reputation rather than hers. The position would start immediately, Diana continued. Full relocation assistance to Chicago, your own team, direct client contact. Everything a strategic mind like yours deserves. I'll need time to consider this, Kitty said, her voice steadier than she felt. Of course. Though opportunities like this don't wait indefinitely. Diana's smile was sympathetic and predatory in equal measure. I do hope you'll give it serious thought. A woman with your capabilities shouldn't spend her career in the shadows. After Diana left, Henry and Kitty stood in awkward silence. The job offer sat between them like a lit fuse, threatening to explode everything they'd been building. You should consider it, Henry said finally. Kitty looked at him in surprise. What? Diana's right about one thing, you deserve professional recognition. You deserve to have your name on the strategies you create. And if I took the job? Henry's expression was contemplative before he spoke. Then you'd be making the right career decision. But it would end our working relationship. The words hung heavy between them. Their working relationship had become the foundation for everything else developing between them. Without it, they had no legitimate reason to maintain contact, no excuse for the intimacy they'd built through months of correspondence. Maybe that would be for the best, Kitty said, testing the words. Before this gets more complicated than it already is. Henry studied her face. Is that what you want? Less complicated? Before Kitty could answer, her phone rang. Gary's name appeared on the screen, and she felt Henry's attention sharpen. I should take this. She walked toward a quieter corner of the lobby, but Henry's eyes followed her movement. Hey, beautiful, Gary's voice was warm and familiar. I have news. I'm driving up to surprise you. Kitty's stomach dropped. What? Gary, no. The retreat isn't finished until. I'll be there in about 3 hours. I figured we could have dinner tonight, maybe explore the area tomorrow before you have to head home. Gary, you can't just show up here. This is a work retreat. Which ends today, right? Perfect timing. We can finally have that conversation about our future without work distractions. Kitty glanced toward Henry, who was watching her. Gary, this isn't good timing. Because of your mystery client? Gary's tone shifted, becoming more serious. Kitty, I need to see you. I need to understand what's happening there because you haven't sounded like yourself since this retreat started. Nothing's happening here. Then you won't mind me coming to check on you. The possessiveness in Gary's tone was new, uncomfortable. They'd never defined their relationship as exclusive, never made promises about the future. But his assumption that he could monitor her crossed boundaries. Fine, she said, recognizing she had no choice. But Gary, this is a work environment. Please respect that. Of course, sweetheart. I just want to make sure you're okay. After hanging up, Kitty returned to find Henry and Barbara in intense conversation near the retreat registration table. Barbara's expression suggested victory while Henry looked like someone who just lost a significant battle. "Everything all right?" Kitty asked. "Barbara's leaving," Henry said. "The Morrison crisis has been resolved." "How convenient," Barbara smiled at Kitty with sharp interest. "It appears I'll have time to observe more of your fascinating retreat activities." This was not good news. Barbara's presence would complicate everything, especially with Gary arriving and her 8 o'clock meeting with Henry approaching. The careful balance they'd maintained was about to collapse under external pressure. The afternoon brought a strategic planning exercise that paired participants with different partners, separating Henry and Kitty for the first time in 3 days. Kitty found herself working with Robert Chen, the retreat coordinator's assistant, while Henry was paired with Diana. "Interesting dynamic you have with Mr. Robbins," Robert observed as they worked through their assigned problem. "Very natural partnership. We've worked together for over a year and a half now." "Professionally, yes. But there's something else there, isn't there?" Kitty looked at Robert with surprise. She'd thought their connection was subtle. "What do you mean?" "The way you anticipate each other's thoughts. The way he watches you when you're not looking. The way you both seemed disappointed to be separated for this exercise." Robert smiled kindly. "I coordinate a lot of corporate retreats. I recognize chemistry when I see it. It's complicated. The best connections usually are." Robert's expression became more serious. "But be careful. Office romances are tricky, especially when there are power imbalances involved." "There's no office romance," Kitty said quickly. "Isn't there?" Before Kitty could respond, commotion erupted across the room. Gary Ramsay had arrived early, and he was making his presence known with the confidence of someone who belonged anywhere he chose to appear. Gary was everything Henry wasn't, casual where Henry was refined, openly affectionate where Henry was disciplined and composed, comfortable in his own skin in ways that suggested he'd never questioned his right to take up space in any room. "There's my girl," Gary said, crossing the room to sweep Kitty into a hug that lifted her off her feet. "Missed you, beautiful." Kitty felt every eye in the room watching their reunion, particularly Henry's steady gaze and Barbara's sharp interest. This was exactly the kind of attention she'd spent years learning to avoid. "Gary, what are you doing here so early? Couldn't wait to see you." Gary's arm remained around her waist, a possessive gesture that felt more performative than natural. "Hope you don't mind me crashing your corporate party." "Of course not," Diana said, appearing beside them with predatory timing. "Any friend of Kitty's is welcome. I'm Diana Langford." Gary accepted Diana's handshake with easy charm. "Gary Ramsay. Kitty's told me so much about this retreat. Sounds like quite an educational experience." "Indeed it has been," Diana's smile was razor-sharp. "Kitty's been the star of many of our team exercises." "Natural leadership abilities, wouldn't you say, Henry?" Henry had approached their group, his expression neutral, but his eyes focused on Gary's arm around Kitty's waist. "Gary Ramsay," Gary extended his hand to Henry. "You must be the famous Henry Robbins. Kitty's told me so much about working with you." "Has she?" Henry's handshake was brief, professional. "All positive, I hope." "Absolutely. Though she's been keeping you pretty mysterious. Makes a guy curious about what kind of boss inspires such loyalty." The word boss carried implications both men understood perfectly. Gary was establishing territory, making clear that whatever work relationship existed between Henry and Kitty, he had personal claims that superseded business arrangements. "Kitty's insights have been invaluable to my practice," Henry replied evenly. "I'm sure they have been." Gary's smile was friendly, but his eyes were assessing. "She's got a brilliant mind. Too brilliant to stay hidden behind other people's success much longer." The comment hit like a targeted strike. Gary knew exactly what he was doing, highlighting the power imbalance while positioning himself as someone who wanted to elevate Kitty rather than utilize her. "Gary," Kitty interrupted, uncomfortable with the masculine posturing, "why don't I show you to your room? You must be tired from the drive." "Actually," Barbara interjected, "I was hoping to speak with you privately, Kitty. About some official matters." "Now isn't really the time," Henry said firmly. "Oh, but it is," Barbara's smile was coldly pleasant. "Especially with Ms. Carpenter's friend here. It might help her think through some important decisions." "We'd love to hear in the comments about times when you've had to choose between different paths in life. What helped you decide which direction to take? Share your experiences below." Kitty found herself trapped between competing demands: Gary's expectant affection, Barbara's work-related pressure, Diana's job offer, and Henry's increasingly strained control. The fragile balance she'd held for 3 days was finally crumbling. "I need some air," she said, stepping away from Gary's embrace. "Excuse me." She walked quickly toward the resort's back exit, needing space to think. But before she could escape, Henry caught up with her. "Kitty, wait. Not now, Henry." "Yes, now. Before this situation gets more complicated." They stood in the resort's back corridor, away from the others but still technically in public space. Henry moved closer, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "Don't let them push you into decisions you're not ready to make." "What decisions? Gary's visit? Barbara's advice? Diana's job offer? Or the conversation we're supposed to have at 8 o'clock that could unravel everything we've worked so hard to establish? All of it. Any of it. Whatever you're not certain about." Kitty looked at Henry's face, seeing concern and something else, fear, maybe, that she was slipping away from him under external pressure. "Henry, what are we doing? Really? I don't know. But I know I don't want to stop doing it." The admission hung between them. They were standing at the edge of something that could change everything, and both knew it. "Your business partner thinks you're making an expensive mistake. My business partner doesn't understand that some things are worth more than money. And Gary thinks you're taking advantage of a power imbalance. What do you think?" Kitty studied Henry's face. The silver threading his hair, the intensity in his blue eyes, the way he held himself like someone accustomed to authority but currently stripped of certainty. "I think," she said, "that I've never been more confused about anything in my life." Henry stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne and see the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent managing other people's problems. "Kitty, whatever happens tonight, whatever you decide about Diana's job offer or Gary's visit or any of it, I need you to know something." "What?" "These past months working with you have been the best partnership I've ever had. But these 3 days getting to know you as a person, they've been something else entirely. Henry. I'm not finished." His voice was quiet but intense. "I know the complications. I know the risks. But I also know that walking away from whatever this is between us would be the biggest mistake I've ever made." The words hung in the air between them, a declaration that changed everything. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that at 8 o'clock tonight, I'll be on that terrace waiting for you. Not as your client, not as Henry Robbins the consultant, but as a man who's falling for a woman he never expected to meet." Before Kitty could respond, Gary's voice echoed down the corridor. "Kitty? Where did you disappear to?" Henry stepped back, but his eyes never left her face. 8 o'clock, he said quietly. "Please." Then he was gone, leaving Kitty alone in the corridor with her racing heart and the weight of an impossible decision. Gary appeared around the corner, his expression concerned. "There you are. Everything okay? You looked overwhelmed back there." "I'm fine. Just needed a moment to process everything." Gary studied her face with the familiarity of someone who'd known her for years. "Kitty, what's really going on here? And don't tell me it's nothing, because I can see something shifted since you arrived at this retreat. Gary. Is it him? Your client? Because if he's making you uncomfortable, we can handle that. He's not making me uncomfortable. Then what is he making you? The question cut straight to the heart of her confusion. What was Henry making her? Nervous, excited, hopeful, terrified, alive in ways she'd forgotten were possible. I don't know, she admitted. Gary's expression softened. Sweetheart, I drove up here because I was worried about you. Your voice has been different every time we've talked since this retreat started. Distant. Distracted. Like your mind was somewhere else entirely. My mind's been on work. Has it? Or has it been on him? Kitty looked at Gary, solid, dependable Gary who'd never made her question her worth or her intelligence, who'd been a steady presence in her life for 2 years without demanding more than she was ready to give. Gary, I care about you. You know that. But I'm not sure what I want anymore. About anything. Gary was quiet for a moment, processing her honesty. Okay. That's fair. But Kitty, men like him, wealthy, powerful, used to getting what they want, they don't usually have serious intentions with women like you. Women like me? Working-class women. Women who didn't grow up in their world. I'm not saying he's a bad guy, but I am saying that his version of complications probably looks very different from yours. The words echoed Barbara's earlier warnings and Diana's pointed observations about career advancement. Everyone seemed certain that whatever existed between her and Henry was destined to fail, undone by forces outside their control. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was letting 3 days of heightened emotion and forced proximity cloud her judgment about what was realistic. I should get ready for dinner, she said finally. Our 8 o'clock reservation? Kitty's stomach dropped. She'd forgotten that Gary would expect to spend the evening with her, would expect her full attention and affection after driving hours to surprise her. But Henry would be waiting on the terrace at 8 o'clock for a conversation that could change everything between them. Actually, Gary, there's a final retreat event tonight, I can't skip. What time does it end? I'm not sure. Maybe late. Gary's expression tightened with suspicion and hurt. Kitty, are you avoiding spending time with me? No, this weekend has been more intense than I expected. I need to see it through properly. Fine. I'll wait for you. However late it runs, we can still have time together. The weight of divided loyalties pressed against Kitty's chest. Gary deserved better than half-truths and divided attention. Henry deserved an honest conversation about what was developing between them. She deserved the chance to make decisions based on her own desires rather than everyone else's expectations. But wanting and deserving were different things, and sometimes the responsible choice meant disappointing everyone, including yourself. Gary, maybe you should drive back tonight. Let me finish this retreat properly, and we can talk when I'm home with a clearer head. Are you serious? I drove 4 hours to surprise you, and you're asking me to leave? I'm asking for time to think. About what? About him? The question hung between them, demanding honesty Kitty wasn't sure she was ready to give. But Gary's eyes already held the answer he'd seen in her face. Yeah, he said quietly. That's what I thought. He turned and walked back toward the lobby, leaving Kitty alone in the corridor with the weight of hurt feelings and impossible choices. 7:15. 45 minutes until Henry would be waiting on the terrace for a conversation that could change everything. 45 minutes to decide whether she was brave enough to risk everything she'd built for the possibility of something real. Chapter 4. 8 o'clock arrived with mountain darkness and the weight of impossible decisions. Kitty stood outside her hotel room door, keycard in one hand, phone showing missed calls from Gary in the other. Through her window, she could see the terrace where Henry waited, a solitary figure against the resort's ambient lighting. She could stay in her room. Let the moment pass. Return to Atlanta tomorrow and pretend 3 days of heightened emotion had been nothing more than retreat-induced fantasy. Their work relationship resumed, sustained by polite emails and pre-arranged calls, never again tempting fate by breaching the comfort of distance. Or she could walk downstairs and have the conversation that would change everything. Her phone buzzed with a text from Gary. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have left angry. Can we talk?" Another from her sister Kayla. "How's the retreat? You've been radio silent for days." And one from Diana. "Hope you're considering our offer. Opportunity like this won't wait indefinitely." Everyone wanted something from her. Everyone had opinions about what she should do, what she deserved, what was realistic for someone in her position. But for 18 months, only Henry had wanted her thoughts, her insights, her authentic perspective without trying to change or limit or categorize her. Kitty pocketed her phone and walked toward the elevator. Henry stood at the terrace railing, hands braced against the stone ledge, shoulders tense with uncertainty. He'd changed from his retreat casual clothes into dark slacks and a white button-down. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said without turning around. "I wasn't sure either." Henry faced her then, and something in his expression made her chest tighten. This wasn't the polished consultant she'd worked with for 18 months or even the slightly rumpled retreat participant she'd gotten to know over the past few days. This was a man stripped of usual armor, standing in the mountain darkness with nothing but honesty. "How's Gary?" he asked. Hurt. Confused. Probably driving back to Atlanta, wondering what happened to the woman he thought he knew. And what did happen to her? Kitty moved to the railing beside him, close enough to feel the warmth from his body but not quite touching. "I think she met someone who saw her differently than she saw herself." How did she see herself? As someone who solved other people's problems from behind the scenes. Someone useful but not essential. Henry turned toward her, his voice quiet but intense. "And how did he see her?" "That's what I came here to find out." They stood in silence for a moment, both aware they were approaching territory neither had mapped before. Around them, the mountain resort settled into evening quiet, but the space between them thrummed with tension. "Kitty," Henry said finally, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "All those months ago, when you became my virtual assistant, I thought I was hiring someone to manage my schedule and handle correspondence. Instead, I found someone who understood my work better than I did. Someone whose insights transformed how I approached every client problem." Henry paused, seeming to gather courage for what came next. "But it wasn't just your skills and competence. It was the way you thought about problems, the questions you asked in emails that made me reconsider assumptions I'd held for years. It was your humor in late-night messages that made me realize I'd forgotten how to laugh at work. It was your perspective on situations that reminded me why I became a consultant in the first place." Kitty felt tears prick her eyes, but didn't interrupt. "These past 3 days, getting to know you as a person instead of just a brilliant mind behind perfectly crafted emails, Kitty, it's been like discovering color when you didn't know you'd been living in black and white." "Henry. I'm not finished." His voice carried an urgency that made her heart race. "I know the complications. I know Gary cares about you, and he's probably right that men like me don't usually have serious intentions with women like you. I know Barbara thinks I'm risking everything I've built. I know Diana's job offer would give you the recognition you deserve." Henry stepped closer, close enough that she could see the way evening shadows played across his face. "But I also know that every morning for so long, the first thing I did was check for your emails. I know that solving problems with you became the part of my day I looked forward to most. I know that meeting you in person has made me realize I've been sleepwalking through my own life for years." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm falling in love with you, Kitty Carpenter. The woman who sacrificed her career ambitions to take care of her mother. The woman who sees solutions where everyone else sees problems." The words hit like lightning, illuminating everything she'd been afraid to acknowledge. This was a man who'd seen her truly and chosen to risk everything for the possibility of something real. "I know it's complicated," Henry continued. "But Kitty, what if it's not? What if this is the thing that makes all the complications worthwhile?" Tears were flowing now. "Henry, I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of wanting something I can't have. Of risking everything I've built for something that might not survive outside this resort. Of not being enough for someone like you when the novelty wears off." Henry moved closer, his hands coming up to frame her face with gentle certainty. "Kitty, look at me." She met his eyes, seeing nothing but sincerity and something that looked remarkably like love. "You are not a novelty. You are not someone I'm settling for or experimenting with. You are the woman I want to build something real with, complications and all." "What about Barbara? The business concerns?" "Barbara will adapt or she won't. The business will survive or it won't. But I will not spend the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to choose you." "And Diana's job offer? Take it if you want it. Don't take it if you don't. But either way, I want to be part of your life while you're making those decisions." "Henry, what if we ruin everything? What if this destroys our working relationship and we lose what we've already built? Then we'll build something new." His thumbs brushed away her tears with tender precision. "Kitty, I've spent years building a business. I've spent 18 months building a partnership with you. But I've never built love with anyone. I want to try. With you." The confession hung between them like a bridge across impossible distance. Around them, mountain winds stirred through resort gardens, carrying the scent of night-blooming jasmine and possibility. "I'm falling in love with you too," Kitty whispered. "I've been trying not to, but Henry, I can't stop thinking about you. About us. About what we could be if we were brave enough to try." Henry's expression transformed, hope and relief and something deeper replacing the uncertainty he'd carried all evening. "Are we brave enough? I don't know. But I think I want to find out." When Henry kissed her, it was with months of longing finally finding expression. Soft at first, questioning, then deeper as she responded with equal intensity. They kissed like people who'd been waiting their entire lives to discover what they'd been missing. When they finally separated, both breathing unsteadily, Henry rested his forehead against hers. "What happens now?" Kitty asked. "Now we figure out how to build something real together. Starting tomorrow? When we go back to our regular lives and everyone has opinions about what we're doing? Starting tonight. Right here. By choosing each other despite everyone's opinions." They stood wrapped in each other's arms, mountain darkness surrounding them like a protective cocoon. For the first time in 3 days, Kitty felt peace instead of confusion, certainty instead of overwhelming choice. "Gary was right about one thing," she said against Henry's chest. "What's that?" "Men like you don't usually have serious intentions with women like me." Henry pulled back to look at her face. "Lucky for you, I'm not like other men. And lucky for me, you're not like anyone I've ever met." "Henry?" "Yeah. I want to try. All of it. Whatever this becomes, whatever complications we face, I want to try." Henry's smile was radiant, transforming his entire face with genuine joy. "In that case, Kitty Carpenter, would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow night? Not as client and virtual assistant, but as Henry and Kitty who are figuring out how to date each other?" "I'd love that. And would you consider keeping your current job, at least for now, so we can navigate this transition together without adding the stress of major career changes?" "What about the complications? The career implications and boundary concerns everyone's so worried about?" "We'll handle them as they come. Together. With complete honesty about what we're doing and why." Kitty felt something settle in her chest, the peace that came from making a decision that felt authentically right despite external pressure to choose otherwise. "Yes," she said simply. To all of it. Yes. When Henry kissed her again, it was with the confidence of someone who'd found exactly what he'd been searching for without knowing he was searching. They held each other in the mountain darkness, both understanding that everything would be different now, both ready for the complications that would come with choosing love over safety. Later, they talked until nearly midnight, about practical considerations, about their fears, about the conversation Henry would have with Barbara and the call Kitty would make to Gary. They planned their first official date, discussed how to handle client meetings, and laughed about the email relationship that had started everything. You know, Henry said as they prepared to return to their respective rooms, I have a confession. What's that? Those late-night emails I mentioned, the ones I wrote but never sent. Some of them weren't about business at all. What were they about? You. Wondering what you looked like when you laughed. Wondering if you were as brilliant in person as you seemed in writing. Wondering what it would feel like to have conversations that didn't have to maintain professional distance. I wrote those emails too, Kitty admitted. Messages I deleted before sending, wondering if you ever thought about me as more than just someone who managed your schedule. Every day, Henry said simply. 4 months. They said goodnight with the reluctance of people who'd found something precious and didn't want to let it go, even temporarily. But they also said goodnight with the confidence of people who knew tomorrow would bring new possibilities instead of new constraints. 3 months later. Kitty sat in the conference room of Robbins Consulting, leading her third client strategy presentation of the week. Across the table, executives from a Fortune 500 company listened intently as she explained the market analysis that would save them millions in operational costs. Ms. Carpenter, the CEO said when she finished, this is brilliant work. How quickly can we implement these recommendations? I'll have the implementation timeline to you by tomorrow morning, Kitty replied with confidence that had grown over months of being recognized for her strategic capabilities rather than her administrative skills. After the clients left, Henry appeared in the conference room doorway with 2 cups of coffee and a smile that still made her pulse quicken. How did it go? He asked, settling into the chair beside her. They're implementing all our recommendations. Full strategic overhaul. Our recommendations. I like the sound of that. Kitty accepted the coffee gratefully. Still feel strange sometimes, having my name on the reports instead of just crafting them behind the scenes. Good strange or bad strange? Good strange. Definitely good strange. 3 months of navigating their transition from client assistant to business partners to romantic couple had taught them both things about compromise, honesty, and the difference between professional respect and personal love. Barbara had initially threatened to dissolve their partnership, but ultimately decided that profits mattered more than her personal opinions about appropriate relationships. Diana had been less gracious about Kitty declining the Chicago position, but other opportunities had emerged as Kitty's reputation grew. Gary had needed time to process everything, but eventually wished her well, admitting he'd seen the shift in her voice even before the retreat ended. Dinner tonight? Henry asked, his hand finding hers across the conference table. Your place or mine? Mine. I'm cooking. You're cooking. Should I be worried? Probably. But I figured it was time I learned to do something domestic and romantic for the woman I'm in love with. The casual declaration of love still made Kitty's heart flutter, even after months of hearing it regularly. They'd moved slowly, building their romantic relationship on the foundation of intellectual partnership and genuine friendship they developed through months of correspondence. Speaking of domestic and romantic, Kitty said, Kayla called. She wants to know when she's going to meet the man who transformed her sister from workaholic hermit to someone who actually talks about her personal life. Anytime she wants. Your family is important to you, which makes them important to me. And your mother? Henry's expression grew more complex. Mom's coming around. Slowly. The fact that profits have increased 30% since you became a full partner helps with her acceptance. She still thinks you're slumming it with the help. She thinks I'm the luckiest man alive to have found someone who challenges me professionally and personally. She just won't admit it yet." Kitty laughed, the sound rich and unguarded. "Give her time. I plan to give her all the time she needs. I plan to give us all the time we need for everything." "Everything?" Henry's expression became more serious, more intimate. "Marriage. Children, if you want them. A life built on partnership instead of convenience." The words carried the weight of promises and possibilities Kitty had never allowed herself to dream about. "That sounds like a lot of complications," she said teasingly. "The best kind of complications," Henry replied, bringing her hand to his lips for a gentle kiss. "The kind worth choosing every day." As they packed up from the conference room, preparing to head home together, Kitty reflected on the distance she'd traveled in 3 months. From invisible virtual assistant to recognized strategic partner. From emotionally guarded to openly vulnerable. From settling for safety to choosing possibility. "Henry," she said as they reached the parking garage. "Yeah? Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me. For really seeing me." Henry stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "Kitty, you don't need to thank me for recognizing your worth. You just needed to start recognizing it yourself. I'm learning. We both are." They drove home together in Henry's car, hands linked across the console, talking about client strategies and dinner plans and weekend possibilities with the comfortable intimacy of people who'd chosen to build something real together. That evening, over Henry's surprisingly successful attempt at homemade pasta, they talked about the resort retreat that had changed everything. "Do you ever regret it?" Kitty asked. "Taking the risk on someone like me?" "Every day," Henry said solemnly, then smiled at her alarmed expression. "I regret that it took a corporate retreat to make me brave enough to tell you how I felt. What if I'd said no that night on the terrace? Then I would have respected your decision and figured out how to be the best client and friend you'd ever had. And if we hadn't worked out? If the complications had been too much? Then we would have learned something valuable about ourselves and what we needed from life." Kitty studied Henry's face across the dinner table, still sometimes amazed that this thoughtful, successful, genuinely good man had chosen to build a life with her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Just wondering how I got so lucky." "We both got lucky. We found each other when we weren't even looking." "Actually," Kitty said with a smile, "I think we found each other exactly when we were ready to be found." Later that evening, as they settled into the comfortable routine they developed, Henry reading industry reports while Kitty worked on client proposals, both of them content in shared space, Kitty's phone buzzed with a message. "Brian from the retreat," she told Henry. "He wants to know if we'd be willing to speak at next quarter's corporate communication conference about successful partnerships. What do you think?" "I think," Kitty said, moving to curl up beside Henry on the couch, "that we have a pretty good story to tell about communication, trust, and taking risks for the right person." "The right person, huh?" "The perfect person," she said, reaching up to kiss him with the confidence of someone who'd learned her worth and found someone who valued it completely. Outside their window, Atlanta settled into evening quiet, but inside their shared space, everything was warm and bright and full of a love that transforms people from the inside out. They'd started as client and virtual assistant, built something real through 18 months of emails and 3 days of mountain retreat honesty, and chosen each other despite every practical reason to play it safe. Now they were partners in business and life, still learning each other's rhythms, still discovering new depths to their connection, still choosing love over fear every single day. It wasn't the safe choice or the expected choice or the choice everyone else would make in their situation. But it was their choice, built on authentic recognition of each other's value and the courage to build something real together. And in the end, that made all the difference. Dear Love Diaries family, we hope Kitty and Henry's story touched your heart the way it touched ours. Their journey reminds us that real love often comes disguised as professional partnership, that authentic connection transcends social expectations, and that sometimes the most beautiful relationships begin when we're brave enough to let someone truly see who we are behind our professional personas. Have you ever found love in an unexpected place? Have you had to choose between what felt safe and what felt right? We'd love to hear your stories in the comments below, your experiences with taking emotional risks, finding love through friendship, or discovering someone saw your worth before you recognized it yourself. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and let us know which moment touched you most. And don't forget to subscribe to our Dear Love Diaries family for more stories about the courage it takes to choose authentic love over convenient safety. Tomorrow, we'll share another tale of hearts connecting across impossible odds. Because love has a way of finding us exactly when we're ready to be found, even when we didn't know we were looking. Until then, remember, you are worthy of being seen, valued, and chosen by someone who recognizes your authentic worth. Sometimes the greatest risk is not taking the risk at all. With love and hope. Your Dear Love Diaries family.